So welcome to our next Ask the Expert session. This is the second of a three-part series where we're focusing on home working. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Sarah Birkinshaw. I'm the Managing Director at Quest Consulting Services. So we provide HR and safety support, and obviously home working being a hot topic right now. I'm delighted to introduce Paula Dixon, who's a business psychologist from Hazon Consulting. Paula will introduce herself in a moment and explain exactly what a business psychologist is for those that probably don't understand. But what we are going to be talking about today really is looking at more some of the mental health and wellbeing issues that sit around home working. So Paula, over to you to give us a bit of an introduction to you and your company first of all, before we launch into our session today.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Well, first of all, just to say it's great to be invited along today, because anything in the relationship and the side of well-being is such a passionate thing for us at Hazon. Now, business psychology and the services that we offer are quite broad, so it tends to be things around leadership solutions, team development, recruitment, coaching, including things like executive coaching, neurodiversity coaching. And one of our particular passions is well-being, because we see that kind of practitioner and employee well-being has been intrinsically linked with how effective people are on their roles. So it's a really great opportunity to think and talk to you today about some of the things that can be done to help employees and employers manage this move towards more home working.
Yeah, that's great. We'll value your opinions today, I'm sure. Right. So we've done our first session. We focused very much on home working and the environment. So some of the practicalities businesses have got to look at, such as, you know, the equipment and setup of a home office, kind of insurance, financial considerations, all of that. So today we wanted to take a particular view around well-being, because it is such a publicised topic at the minute. Obviously, home working initially, I suppose, was a forced situation for many businesses because of the virus. However, you know, as we continue to move throughout the year, you know, what we're saying to our clients is really we need to be treating this like a permanent arrangement, because for most it's been going on 6 months, and obviously the government guidance last week suggested office workers in particular might be encouraged to work from home for another 6 months. So just in relation to the kind of issues, what issues have you come across or heard that home workers are struggling with?
Yeah, I think there's a lot on the mental health side of things, and I think you touched on that point there about change. When we sort of used to working in a particular way, being in offices and things like that, and then suddenly we're being forced to work in a different environment that might not necessarily be of our choosing. So there's a lot of discussions with my clients around what that change means and what that feeling brings about in terms of people's motivations, their mental health. I think that idea of, you know, we've been working for 6 months, or some people have, in this kind of set of circumstances, and the fact that it's going to go on long, there's that idea of novelty at the beginning, you know, and people can try and get on with it. But when it starts to become more of a reality, and I did read I think it was one of the Deloitte pieces of research talked about, on average, maybe sort of 30% of businesses are thinking about keeping this going, you know, so it's with us for the future. So there's a lot around boundary management that I've noticed for individuals, in terms of, you know, you're working from home, you're based from home, you've got families, and it's kind of that creep, which we'll talk in a little bit more detail. But I think it's about how people are managing that so that they're able to kind of feel well, be well, and sort of relate to colleagues when you're in that virtual environment.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. From the employees we speak to on a day-to-day basis, definitely the novelty factor of working at home, I think a lot of people quite embraced that. And I think for lots where the schools were closed, that was an absolute godsend, you know, because it gave them the ability to manage those family commitments while still being able to be committed to their job and their employer. But it does bring different challenges, as you say, the longer this goes on for. And I do think that lots of companies are reviewing how they work now. It's opened their eyes to the fact that home working actually can be a very practical way. So just to touch on the point you made then, I suppose, as a question, you know, when you are working from home, and I certainly agree that I think this is a definite blurred boundary when I work from home. So how can employees kind of put things in place to maintain a good work-life balance so that there is that distinction between workplace and home?
Yeah, in a number of levels. I think one of the things that can be really effective is having a separate space that's off from the rest of the house, because actually you've got all your kind of work documents and your computer and your laptop. So actually having that physical space mentally enables us to kind of, if we've had a difficult day, put things away, we don't see them, they're not visual. Now, granted, not everybody's had the luxury of having kind of a designated workspace. So at a practical level, if you are working, say, at the kitchen table and things like that, not leaving those documents out when the family, comes home, or when you kind of engage in beyond that, because even just seeing things can be enough of a trigger sometimes for people to feel like it's less of a kind of distinction and more of it's all melding together, which is really hard for people wanting to switch off. One of the other things as well is that idea of having routine. Yes. So you can have routine in what you do, because then you can enforce some boundaries. So the idea behind that is that it's that idea of not being available 24/7. You might feel like you need to be, because obviously with technology and with things pinging and popping up, it means that it's very hard to manage those distractions. So a lot of the kind of advice that we talk about is maybe having something on your email footer that lists your working hours. So that I've seen sort of a head teacher that I've coached and worked with, they've kind of put on the bottom of their footer, even though I might respond to emails within or send emails within this time, there's no obligation for the reader to do that. And I think some of it is about managing these boundaries, so that in a circumstance where you feel like you're not in control, you're starting to put those boundaries that work for you. The other idea is that, choosing when you are going to be online. And I think leaders can really help with some of this.
Yes.
Because in terms of boundary management, we talk about leadership and culture and what the organisation looks like. And if you're somebody that gets messages at every hour of the day and the leader's kind of saying, well, you manage your boundary, but they're not doing that, it's really difficult for people not to follow suit. So actually leaders can really support individuals in this by kind of, when they've got a day off, not being available all day, not sort of emailing and checking in on people, and really sort of maintaining those boundaries. I think that role modelling is really, really important. So those are the kind of practical things that I think people can do as a starting point.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point actually you make. Almost the leading by example is what's needed.
Yeah.
And there is that temptation, and I am probably the worst for it.
Right, okay.
Where you do just pick up the messages as they come through. Technology for lots will be like me. If they're not buzzing on a watch, when I've got my iWatch on, it's on my phone or whatnot. Yeah. So I think, leaders setting the example is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And I think what I've seen a lot of business owners feeling really uncomfortable about, Paula, has been that relinquishing, I suppose, what they feel like is control. Yeah. So when you've got, an office environment, and as a business owner, you can see what people are doing.
Yeah.
People home working, that suddenly removes that element. And so, we are literally working on trust then, aren't you? You're working on the basis that you are trusting your employees to manage their work and be productive.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are some great tips that I know from speaking with you that help employees, I suppose, keep that focus so that they are productive, and they're giving that reassurance to their employers as well, that the arrangement's working well, because what's being done is what's needed to be done. Yeah. So what kind of tips could you maybe share that employees could do at home to remain productive, so that it gives that reassurance to their employers?
Yeah, I think one of the things is this idea of, we live in a world where we're getting bombarded with information and our attention is limited. So one of the most simplest things to kind of, maintain and protect your energy, not just to be productive and motivated at work, but also for your well-being as well, is that idea of having a structure to your day and trying to limit the degree of multitasking that you do. Because, if you're handling and switching your attention, certainly online, and your phone's going off, it can be really hard to maintain that focus. We all know what it's like. iPhones were designed so you disappear, and the next thing you know, an hour's gone by. So if you can minimize distractions for yourself in that, and work, not the expectation of working hours on end without a break. Yes. We know that people's concentration is limited. Research suggests sort of on average, and that this was a piece with musicians, professional musicians, but essentially it's about 75 to 90 minutes that people can work at without kind of needing that refreshing break, that kind of idea where we've used up our neurotransmitters by focusing on a piece of work, so we need to recharge. So the idea is, if you can start to shift your focus, maybe less about the hours that you're working, because people might be working, you know, a mixture earlier, later around families, and try to focus on, be future focused when you're coming up with a plan for the day, and think, you know, by the end of today, this week, this month, what are the key things that I'd like to achieve? And kind of looking at it in that, you know, in that way, so that everything that you're doing is focused solely on trying to move you closer to that goal. So then you get that sense of achievement, that actually what you're achieving is helpful. Now, this can be hard for leaders to get your head around, that kind of, you know, what is it that you're producing rather than the hours that you do. But I think there is that trust element to it. If people are trusted to deliver an outcome rather than, you know, covering every minute, what you often find is that people relax a little bit more and are actually naturally more motivated anyway. And this idea of, you know, we all have peaks and troughs in our energy. You know, I don't know what you are, Sarah. Are you a morning person, or do you know, afternoon? When's your
I'm certainly not a morning person.
You're not a morning person, okay. Yeah, well, you know, we all have that kind of unique circadian rhythm where some people are naturally on it in the morning. And the idea is about maybe scheduling some of your more challenging tasks, or maybe the more cognitively draining ones, for a time when your energy is peaking. So that idea of you not kind of, you know, or batching tasks together that are similar, so that you can work through them in a process rather than kind of scattering your attention across that. And that idea of prioritization. There are lots of strategies and tools that I work with in terms of team development and one-to-one in coaching, where it's kind of, you know, you've got this time, how are you going to decide what's important, what's urgent? And all of those kind of strategies and planning can help people to have something in place that, you know, if there are discussions about what's going on, you can share what you've been doing, but equally, it helps people to reduce the personal level of stress. It increases their focus, because actually it's not all held in your head. It's written down, and you can kind of say, well, this is what I'm doing. And, you know, and the final bit on that is not to schedule something, you know, for every minute, because we know that things run over. We know that sometimes, you know, you might need to catch up on something if it's run over. And that can actually help to avoid that idea of, you know, time's going beyond you and it's slipping away. And that stress that if, you know, your 10 o'clock meeting's gone beyond 11, and you spend the rest of the day trying to catch up from that. So just building in maybe time for reflection, maybe at lunchtime, a bit of a check-in with how you're doing against your plan can help. And also thinking about your mind state. So when, you know, if you're an athlete, this is an analogy that I like to use, you wouldn't just tip up and expect to run a world record on that morning. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it. And I think that same idea can be applied with good work. You know, if you are in that right mindset, if you've given yourself a bit of time to come round in the morning, or get a drink, eat breakfast, just kind of, you know, get in a good state to do some good work, I think that will serve you really well in terms of building that routine that looks after yourself, but also makes you more productive.
Yeah, I think there's some really, really valid points there. And sometimes it's just the simplest that can make a big difference when you're home working.
Yeah.
You know, we talked as a team here. I mean, we are back in the office now, and have decided to stay that way for the nature of what we do. However, you know, home working did throw up challenges for people. Exactly like you've said, it's putting yourself in a position where, you know, you aren't going to have those distractions. But I think we all found naturally in an office environment, you get those breaks, don't you, that you don't necessarily get at home. You know, for us, you know, if I want to print something, I have to stand up and naturally walk across the office to go collect a print. When I'm in my home office, my printer's right next to my computer, so I can be nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, so it's little examples like that of taking a break. I know I spoke to one employee, and she'd said, you know, actually what she'd done is a simple thing like when she needed to go for a loo break, she has a downstairs toilet. She doesn't use it, so it makes her go upstairs to use the upstairs bathroom, just to get you moving it. And naturally that, you know, just breaking your own mind from what you're doing. So I think that there's some very valid and practical points there, Paula.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I found has been really at the forefront of lots of our clients' minds when we're talking to them about home working, and I think certainly the news supports this at the minute, is this idea of home workers feeling really isolated, because you might be used to working in a team environment where you get that natural interaction during the course of the day.
Yeah.
And obviously when you're working from home, although, you know, that might be a really great flexible way of working, you do almost lose that social connection. So, you know, from your perspective, what could employers do that can help encourage keeping that social connection between their teams whilst they're home working?
Yeah, that's such a good point, isn't it? Because I think what we all know is humans, we are social animals, aren't we? We really do sort of need that connection, and it does make it hard when we're kind of remote from one another. One of the really good ideas that I heard an organisation do is to try and create, you know, these water cooler moments, as you said. It's those opportunities throughout the day. And one of the organisations that I'd worked with, they created kind of like an office break time, but what they've done is randomly allocated people using the sort of breakout function, you know, with some of the online tools that allowed people to just have a bit of connection with another colleague. So they were really kind of encouraging people to spend a little bit of time. So although it is online and that's limited, it was that opportunity to maybe just find out a little bit more. And I think because it's coming from the employer, if you will, or the leader, it's that idea of permission. And I think when we're kind of tucked away in an office, you know, and your time flows and you're really busy, it's really difficult to sometimes feel like you can give yourself that permission just to take a bit of time off. So when leaders create those opportunities for you to speak to somebody or have that time and you know it's okay, I think people are more inclined to take advantage of it. Now, I know in terms of, you know, you might question why, but we know that people who feel socially isolated, that's, you know, associated with things like increased anxiety and depression. So we can't really sort of underestimate how important it is to allow people to have that opportunity. And I know in terms of spotting, it's a lot harder to spot if people are well or if something's not quite right when it is online. So there's this idea of sort of checking in with people from a leadership point of view. Certainly one of the leaders that I work with, since lockdowns occurred, still has daily check-ins with their team members. And it's not necessarily about work-related things. You know, it's sometimes just literally what's going on and that opportunity to speak freely. And if people do that, that really supports that idea of psychological safety, which, you know, people are feeling comfortable and able to express truly what's going on. So it's about, you know, it might seem a smaller thing, just having a quick conversation, but providing that opportunity allows people to be heard, you know, facilitates people sort of sharing when you say, how are you and what's going on? And it makes it a lot easier to spot if somebody's not quite right. For example, maybe if they're a little bit withdrawn, it gives you that opportunity to maybe delve a little bit deeply in a private setting. The other thing as well is at an individual level, obviously some of your work colleagues you'll know better than others, is have you got a little buddy system? You know, because the thing, you know, there's that element of when we're online, there's a performance mode. You know, if we were naturally sat together, you'd be resting your eyes and looking around because that's what you do. But when we're on screen, we feel like we need to kind of perform and it's tiring and we wonder how we come across. So as well as kind of building relationships with new people, it's about keeping those relationships going with the people who already know you.
Yes.
I think having that connection with someone that you feel like you can openly express, you know, if you're fed up or what's going on, and you can do that, keeping that going, I think between the two of them offers that opportunity to manage that isolation and also bringing teams together if there are opportunities. You know, not everybody wants to speak in a team, so I think it's about understanding some of the team and understanding where you're going, and as an organisation feeling that sense of bonding and social cohesion. And maybe, you know, that can be through an update, what the business is focusing on or what's going on. But again, it's helping people to see that they're part of something bigger. They're not just this person that's sat remotely. So any kind of opportunity for that, although it can be quite timely, I think pays dividends in terms of kind of reduced issues with mental health challenges potentially later down the line.
Yeah, great. And I love that idea, like you say, that, you know, if employers are planning time where there is that element of social interaction, it is that element of permission. You don't feel like you're doing something you shouldn't be when you sat working at home, which, you know, can come across. You know, that kind of leads on quite nicely in terms of communication, because one thing that I've seen a big array of is managers or leaders within businesses. Some have really taken on the challenge of being very overconscious, if you like, of communicating with their teams while they're remote. And others, you know, and quite rightly so, because they might have a lot to focus on in, you know, the challenges that this situation with COVID has thrown on them, probably haven't communicated enough.
Yeah.
So, you know, thinking of the how and when you should be communicating for managers and leaders, what's your advice kind of around that subject?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a topic that I've spoken a lot about, and I think you're absolutely right. It's at the forefront of people's minds. And I think the idea is, you know, if we think about us in terms of being a human, you know, we've got that kind of fight, flight, freeze state of mind where anything that's uncertain can put us in that emotional heightened state. And I think what we all know that's common to all of us is if we don't know the answers and something's uncertain, the chances are we're going to fill in those blanks and those gaps. Yeah. And that's why we know, don't we, about how bad news travels or gossip and rumour travels. And I think from a leader's point of view, you know, if you've got teams that aren't being communicated with, then the chances are they're going to be getting their sources of information from somewhere. It might be other colleagues in the office, it might be the news, and we know that there's a particular negative slant in the news generally, that if you're, you know, even people that aren't particularly anxious might be feeling those feelings, and of course that experience dials everything up. So what can be really, really helpful is if leaders are over communicating, you know, that check-in, that frequency and making time, what that's effectively doing is nipping some of that uncertainty in the bud. Now, we're not talking about, you know, not being honest, and maybe there are some things that need not to be shared if challenges are being faced. But what we're talking about is allowing and helping employees to understand the reality of what's going on and being able to contribute. There's this idea around justice perceptions. In other words, we're far more likely to accept decisions, and including ones that we don't like, if actually the rationale and the way that they've been decided and we've been consulted and maybe had an opportunity to hear and comment, we're far more likely to accept that kind of decision making. So for leaders where things are uncertain, it's really helpful if they're kind of filling in the blanks there, because what you're going to get are people that are on board, people who are probably more committed, more motivated. You're helping them step away from that anxious state of being, and you're kind of helping them move towards, you know, what's going on. And I think this is an ideal opportunity, you know, where organisations have vision, values, and thinking about what it is that, you know, brings people together as individuals. Can you create that kind of inspirational vision of we're all in this together?
Yeah,
it's actually, you know, we talk about that emotional contagion. Senior leaders influence people below them, and that has a massive impact. So if you're, as a leader, kind of saying, look, we acknowledge what's going on, there are challenges, but actually we're in this together. Maybe there's some kind of well-realised sharing of their personal experience. We're not saying if somebody's in crisis, obviously they'd need support, but it's that idea of if leaders can say, you know, I'm a bit irritated, we are going through change, and it's that idea, particularly around the mental health aspect, to normalise some of this.
Yes.
Because actually what can happen when we know we're sort of isolated or at home, we can panic. You know, if we're having a bad day, we can suddenly get really caught up and get really sort of inwardly looking. And that idea of having that conversation more broadly helps people to navigate that. It's that idea of, you know, transitions take time. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, but that's normal. And these kind of transition truths just essentially mean that everybody's going to go through it, but what that will look like at an individual level, and what that will look like on a day-to-day basis, will be very personalised. So that over-communication helps to manage that, and it also builds that kind of mutual relationship where you hope, if you kind of, you know, we're in this together, that if people are struggling, they're going to be far more likely to feel like it's okay to share.
Yes, yeah, absolutely agree. And one last point to pick your brains on today, Paula, before we wrap up for today.
Sure.
Obviously, there's an element for all home workers of self-care. What I really like the idea of championing, though, is that the employers are encouraging that kind of behaviour at home.
Yeah.
So what suggestions could you put forward, maybe some really top tips for how employees can really take care of themselves at home that you think, you know, would be areas that employers could encourage and you know, absolutely get behind, so that their workers feel that they're being looked after?
Yeah, well, I think one of the major bits about this self-care idea is, in an ideal world, we want people to move towards being proactive about it rather than reacting, because we know that the data supports if people don't share, by the time they do share, it's often too late, and that results in time off work, and it's often a lot more significant. So this idea of the culture of the organisation, you know, as we talked before about role modelling, having those open conversations, and actually encouraging people to think about, you know, maybe there's information that can be shared on the intranet, allowing people to speak about this, but really taking it back to basics and thinking about self-care. So that idea that it's really important that people, you know, get sleep. So is your bedroom lovely and dark? If you've spent all day surrounded by screens, you need to kind of give yourself a couple of hours not looking at screens. Are you taking time off in your lunch break where you kind of, you know, trying to look at something green or something different so you can relax? What are you doing about nutrition? Making sure that, you know, your diet's kind of protein rich rather than sort of snacking at your work desk and that kind of thing. So all those kind of healthy initiatives that organisations already do, it's about maybe keeping those going and actually allowing opportunities for people to come together. You know, people have wellbeing advocates in organisations. So can you lead on themes to tie in things for like Wellbeing Week or ideas that people can do? And another part of this is sort of maybe having training or encouraging organisations to be mindful. So this idea of people are developing the skill sets for themselves and they're able to sort of manage their own sort of state of mind and recognise some of the thoughts, feelings and emotions that are going on, they're going to be in a much better state to cope and manage with it. So I think organisations can help by allowing individuals to access maybe apps, encouraging people to sort of get out and go for a walk at lunchtime, encouraging people to sort of, you know, work those hours and take time back if they need to. All those things can really help. Like you said earlier as well, you know, not sitting at your desk, going upstairs to the loo, all that kind of thing can help. And that, I think one of the key things is about encouraging self-compassion, because what we know is that when we're under pressure, we tend to be our own harshest critic.
Yeah.
And I think that leaders in organisations can really try and sort of acknowledge and normalise this mental health to encourage people to be compassionate towards themselves. One of the simplest ways of doing it, my top tip for this, is to imagine, you know, if you're kind of stressed and you've got a lot going on and you're aware of that inner voice that's telling you, you know, you need to do more or it's not good enough, imagine what you would say to a colleague or a friend, you know, and what you'll often find is actually you certainly wouldn't be telling them they're not good enough or they need to do more. If anything, you'd be saying to them, you need to rest or you need to look after yourself.
Yeah.
And I think just it's a very simple thing that you can do, because if what you're thinking in your own mind isn't what you tell someone else, you know that actually there's something that you could do about that. So I think leaders encouraging people and giving them the opportunity to maybe engage in some training or some workshops. There's lots of free stuffs out there. Or maybe, you know, a wellbeing plan, that kind of thing. That would be really helpful for kind of, again, with that permission, encouraging people to incorporate this as kind of their day-to-day practice at work.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Paula, thank you so much for joining us today. There's some great tips there. It's been really insightful. I always learn more when I speak to you every time.
Oh, pleasure.
And I'm sure everybody else will pick up some top tips. We will be sending information along with this video. So in the description of the video, you'll be able to access Paula's email details. So if anything that you've heard really resonates today and you'd like Paula's expertise in your business, then I'm sure she'd be delighted to have a chat and see how she can help. And likewise, there'll be my email in the description of the video. So if you would like to request any of our free resources around home working, so, you know, even covering the first session, which was the more practicalities, along with, you know, the mental health and well-being. And then our third session is going to be covering managing performance of home workers. Again, picking up on lots of elements that Paula's talked about, but hopefully giving you some great practical tips on how you can keep your home workers performing well and, you know, in line with everything that we're doing at the minute is all around helping you build stronger and safer teams. So on that note, thank you all for watching and we look forward to seeing you on the next session.